Perhaps the most exciting round one game of last year's NCAA tournament was between FAU and Memphis, now rivals in the new look American Athletic Conference. Who is going to get the crown in year one?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade.
What up?
Before we get in to our American Athletic Conference preview, part of our conference preview series, I want to read a really fun fact that we learned. This was courtesy of my friend here, Mr. Shade, shared this with me, and we got to talk about this briefly because Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina, UCLA, none of them are part of the American Athletic Conference.
They are not.
They are not considered the true basketball blue bloods. And I don't want to get into a whole blue blood discussion. That can be for another time. I know that is a topic with a lot of vitriol behind it, but the AP football poll started in 1936, and this week is the first time that all 5 of those schools have been ranked at the same time. That is that's almost 100 years.
Yeah.
That is an insane stat. All of these schools, clearly football schools now, obviously none of them are going to have much success on the basketball court this year. Sorry to the Tar Heel and Blue Devil fans out there, but What a fun fact for those schools to finally be showing some, at the same time, I guess, showing some real promise on the gridiron.
Right. Just hashtag football schools. Let's wipe away the blue bloods and start over with the new bloods, UConn and Gonzaga and all of those schools.
That's right.
And we'll see what happens. People are screaming at us right now, Andy, for this blue blood conversation. I love it. No, seriously, it's so cool to see our basketball like top dogs doing it on the gridiron. Way to go.
It's fun. It's fun. I'm a fan, even if John Calipari doesn't want to consider Kentucky a football school, which he adamantly does not.
I forgot about that last summer.
They are a football school right now. All right, let's get into this American Athletic Conference because more than maybe any other conference in college basketball, the storylines, the just kind of updates on this conference are just tremendous. So much change, multiple coaching changes. We'll get into that, but obviously the big storyline is 3 schools out the door, 6 schools coming into the conference, 1 school who's going to be out the door next year. We'll get you caught up here real quick. Of course, the conference is losing Houston, who has moved to the Big 12. All 3 of these schools have moved to the Big 12, Cincinnati and Central Florida. Houston, of course, being the big loss from a men's basketball perspective. They're all going to the Big 12. And then you have 6 schools coming in. That is FAU, of course, who went to the Final Four last year. We'll talk plenty about them. UAB and North Texas, who played each other in the NIT championship last year. North Carolina Charlotte, who won the CBI last year. You're also adding Rice and UT San Antonio. Those are your newcomers. They're joining an existing conference that includes East Carolina, Memphis, South Florida, SMU, who is going to be out the door after this season as they are going to join the AAC, Temple, Tulane.
No, they're in the AAC. They're going to the ACC.
Sorry, the ACC. So forgive me. I'm sorry, they're joining the conference with Stanford, which is, of course, the ACC, as we all would have completely expected. So hopefully everybody's caught up now on the American Conference, which is going through a whole significant amount of changes. And I think the main kind of question is this has predominantly been one of the very best non-Power 6 conferences in college basketball. Last year, they were 8th. They're almost always in the top 10. Of course, Houston has really carried that in a big way. But now, again, you lose some big players in Houston and Cincinnati and Central Florida, but you're gaining, again, a Final Four team, 2 NIT champion teams. Like, you're gaining some really good programs. So, Isaac, do you still envision this being a conference kind of ranked in that 7 to 10 range among like the best college basketball conferences in the country?
I wish I could get a look at Ken Palm's algorithm so that I could figure out the answer to that. Whether it's more about depth or top end stuff. My blink, I'm a big Malcolm Gladwell fan. My blink answer is no. I think they take a little bit of a step back because, as you said, obviously they get in and FAU and these schools that were in the other postseason tournaments. But man, losing Houston is just a massive giant out the door. Kelvin Sampson has this thing rolling, dude, and I love it. It's awesome. But FAU, while they had a great year last year, just doesn't have that staying power yet. I hope they can get it, man. And I think they can under Dusty May, and we expect them to this year. But clearly the biggest longstanding name now in the conference is Memphis. Yeah. And Penny has them operating at I would say strong, not level. Andy, is that a fair way to characterize Memphis in your opinion?
I think so. Yeah, I think they're a good team, but if they're always consistently the best team in this conference, then I think you're probably not looking at a conference that's going to be at that same level. They needed that yin and yang with Houston, and I think FAU can probably be that team eventually, but we're also talking about some of the teams that are probably going to be the best in this conference, even this season. FAU, potentially North Texas, potentially UAB. Like, they're also making a jump to a different conference. And while I think the talent level isn't like this huge, massive leap for them, anytime you join a new conference, you tend to struggle. You struggle because you're traveling to different places, you're staying in different hotels, you're dealing with different officials, you're dealing with different opposing fans. Like, there are so many things that go into joining a new conference. And of course, for these schools, for FAU and the other newcomers, they're also going to play about half their regular season games against teams they are familiar with. So at least they have a bit of an advantage there. But to me, I think that some of the odds of those new schools fully replicating the losses, especially of Houston, but even of Cincinnati and UCF as well, I think it's probably a bit of a dip, although I think long-term, can this conference be consistently, 7, 8, 9 in the country? Yes, I think so. I'm not sure they'll be there right this year, but this is still a really dang good basketball conference.
I'd love to see Wichita State get back to what they were under Greg Marshall. Obviously, they've taken a little bit of a dip since then, but man, they were rolling. Those teams in like the early 2010s with like Clay Anthony early, man, they got screwed.
I love that you shouted out Clay Anthony early. Like, I love Ron Baker and Fred VanVleet, but no, you went with Clay Anthony early, and that he was awesome. I'm a big fan.
But yes, man, VanVleet still doing it in the league. How about that? But yeah, I mean, Andy, I think that FAU is the team to beat this year. I think, we'll talk about them in Memphis, and as you mentioned, that head-to-head matchup where. Speaking of head, I think Penny lost his head a little bit in that one. That was a little bit of a wacky game. But, I think when you get this much new in terms of new coaches, new teams, and all of that, we have these two teams that I think we both think are going to be right at the top. But, man, there's just so much uncertainty of how this 14-team conference is going to play out. It'll be interesting.
No, totally. And I think, Memphis might have 5 new starters, depending on the DeAndre Williams situation.
Team,
you're talking about an FAU team who, they're in a new conference, and some of those challenges I think are going to absolutely affect that team. But it's the same 5 guys. Like, that is such, to me, when you're thinking about all this newness, like having that continuity. And I know we talk about continuity a bunch on the show, but in this particular situation, especially when your number one competition in terms of talent level in the conference is a team that, is coached by, I think Penny Hardaway is a good coach, but I don't know that he's a great coach. And he's going to have probably one of the most difficult seasons in terms of, getting his guys together and getting them playing, at the top level that he's ever had. And I think that's a really good opportunity for FAU to utilize the experience they have, the continuity they have, and be that team, even though they are, in theory, facing more challenges than Memphis might be. I think that's a good spot for them.
Well, it's tough with Memphis because they've got still some roster uncertainty for
even now
reasons. But I mean, if we're looking at a backcourt of Javon Quinterly and Caleb Mills coming from FSU, I love that backcourt matchup with them and FAU, thinking about John L. Davis and Elijah Martin. Like, come on, dude. So, Andy, we've got 5 new coaches in this conference, and not just because they're coming in, like 5 that have been coaching carousel turnover, tied with the Patriot League for the most. And so Charlotte, Aaron Fern comes in, promoted from within. He's the interim right now. North Texas, as Grant McCaslin is off to Texas Tech, brings in Ross Hodge, is promoted from within. South Florida brings in Amir Abdur-Rahim, who was at Kennesaw State last year. The other Owls in the tournament, by the way. And Andy, as you were talking about earlier, they had a pretty competitive game against Xavier, who was a 3 seed last year. So Temple bringing in Adam Fisher, who's been under Jay Wright and Jim Larinaga and Micah Shrewsbury. So great experience for him. Wichita State bringing in Paul Mills. And if you recognize that name, he's the one that's been at Oral Roberts with all the great couple teams they've had there. Summit Coach of the Year last year. And so Max A. Smith and Paul Mills now gone from Tulsa. So that's tough. Although actually Paul Mills will come to Tulsa still because Tulsa's in the league. And so Andy, lots of coaching stuff. And in fact, of the 14 schools in this conference, 8 of these coaches are within their first 2 years at this school. No coach has been longer tenured than Steve Henson at UT San Antonio, and he's only been there 16, 17. No decade-long tenured coaches in this conference.
Yep. For me, that's even more fuel to the continuity that FAU has with Dusty May with that starting 5. Like, I know we'll talk about it more coming up here momentarily, but to me, a conference with a lot of new coaches, with a lot of new teams and new conferences, that continuity means even more.
Well, Andy and I are just crazy enough that even with all that craziness, we're going to try to figure out how to put these teams in tiers and who's going to walk away as the regular season champion and the conference tournament champion. Bound to go morbidly wrong, but we're going to do it anyway. But first, I need to tell you that this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Athletic Brewing. In fact, it's time now for your game changer of the week, brought to you by our friends at Athletic Brewing Company. And you know who it is, Andy? It's my man Mario Cristobal down at Miami, not taking a knee and losing to Georgia Tech on the gridiron. Obviously, we jest and we kid, but boy, by definition, game changer of the week. He does it, man. Athletic Brewing, just like Mario Cristobal, has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, full flavor, well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer. Exclusions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Andy, coming up this weekend on Friday from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern is Locked On College Football Kickoff Live, where we'll try to figure out if those same Miami Hurricanes can get back on track, heading to Chapel Hill to take on the undefeated Tar Heels. Going to be a great weekend, more college football. Make sure you get prepared for it all. Friday from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern on every Locked On YouTube college channel. All right, Andy, let's divide these 14 teams of the American Athletic Conference into tiers. And then we'll give our picks for dark horses and champs and all that kind of stuff. Andy, I went through and did this for us. And so I'm going to give you my tiers and just see where I'm right, where I'm wrong. And then everyone else will let us know as well. But you can be the first to shoot arrows in my direction. I've actually broken this into 6 tiers. I struggled with it, but part of it is because, as we've been talking about, I've got FAU and Memphis right there in tier 1 at the top with nobody there with them. But then I did something wacky after that. I put Tulane alone in tier 2. I just feel like they're not up there with FAU and Memphis, but they are, to me, a notch above UAB and Wichita State and others, which is who I have in the 3rd tier. UAB, Wichita State. 4th tier, SMU and North Texas. I might be a little bit too low on them. We'll see. 5th tier, ECU, East Carolina, Temple, USF, South Florida, and Rice. And then rounding out the bottom, this is honestly, it's like the bookends where I feel most confident, Andy, unfortunately, at the bottom end here. But Charlotte, Tulsa, and UT San Antonio.
Yeah, you kind of touched on the one thing that I think I would probably change, which is just bumping up North Texas. I agree. FAU, Memphis need to be, I think, on their own. I think you could make an argument for maybe UAB to be with Tulane, but I'm honestly, I don't have a big issue with that. I think Tulane is a little bit separate just in terms of where they're at right now. I think that they are definitely 3rd in terms of like preseason projections and kind of where I expect them to be, but I think they're fairly healthily. in that third spot, so I'm good with them being tier 2. But I think for me, I'd probably have UAB, North Texas in the same tier. They were both teams that played each other in that championship. Both lost a lot of talent. Obviously, North Texas loses their coach, which is a significant kind of development for them. Great coach. Tyler Perry out the door. But again, UAB loses Jelly Walker and a handful of key pieces as well. They keep Eric Gaines. I think that they are probably better, but I think that they could probably be in the same tier. And I think Wichita State being in there is fine. So for me, I would probably move North Texas to tier 3, which would leave tier 4 with just SMU. I might toss Rice in there just to make it a little bit different. But honestly, that's kind of that. There's not a huge difference for me. And other than that, I think tier 6, tier 5 are fine. Again, maybe move Rice up to replace North Texas, but otherwise, I think that's a pretty solid list. Charlotte was, a team that had some postseason success last year, but lost a fair amount of talent, new coach. I think they have a lot to prove moving into a new conference. A team that maybe if they finish in the middle half of this conference, middle area, I think they could be a team that moves up as well.
Yeah, and it makes me think too. As you talk about North Texas, it makes me think about Wichita State, and if you almost just flip flop them, not that you can't have more teams in tier 3, but
right. Yeah, I think that's fair to do as well, because Wichita State hasn't quite, a lot of history, recent history, but not a lot of super recent history with that team.
Yeah, and the recent history is not as clear. Correct. Anthony Early. Boom. I apologize for my terrible.
Okay. I don't think Anthony Early expected to get mentioned in any college basketball podcast this year at all. And now we've done it multiple times.
Boom. Here we are. That's twice. Come on with that Ron Baker and with that Van Vliet. I love it. Andy, favorites. I don't think we need to hit on this anymore. FAU and Memphis. We'll get to our picks for where they each land here in just a second. But any dark horses coming out of that? I mean, let me ask you this. FAU Memphis versus the rest of the field of this conference for the conference regular season title.
Yeah, I think it's rare outside of the WCC, I guess, to have where I wouldn't take the field versus the top 2 teams. But I think I'd probably take FAU and Memphis versus the field. I feel pretty strongly that one of those 2 teams is going to win. And we talked about it with Memphis a little bit. There's certainly some concern about their roster right now and even availability of certain guys. Are they going to have Mikey Williams? Are they going to have DeAndre Williams? What is that going to look like for them? But I think those are the 2 most talented teams. And I think they're 2 well-coached teams. And I think they're probably going to be the teams that finish 1 and 2. But if somebody else were to win, and again, we just had the tiers conversation, so it's probably not a shock, but we would go with Tulane here. I think Tulane, the loss of Jalen Cook is pretty tough. He averaged about 20 points, about 5 assists last year, one of the best scoring guards in the entire country, and certainly one of the best in the conference. So that's a tough loss for them. They do keep Jalen Forbes, who was fantastic last year. I think he's going to be fantastic again this year. I'm intrigued by the addition of Colby King coming over from St. John's and that mass exodus of players. I think he could be a guy who steps into a decent role for this team. So I think Asher Woods as well, a guy who transferred from VMI, very, very productive there, 14 points per game. So I think that they have some pieces. I think that they're that they're a solidly well-coached team as well, and by Ron Hunter. So I think that this is a team that could make some noise and probably finishes 3rd. Could they win? Could they maybe upset one of these teams in the conference tournament? Absolutely. Could they win the conference tournament and steal a bid? Yeah, totally. But regular season, I would probably expect one of the other 2 teams to win it.
And that's why I specifically said regular season as opposed to conference tournament, is because it felt like that was the more. But listen. Never will it leave my head the image of Ron Hunter falling off his little stroller thing when his son hit that shot.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Gosh, man, at Georgia State, just what a great moment that was. But yeah, now down at Tulane eating some beignets, and that makes me really hungry. Andy, let's go with our regular season and conference tournament champs. Anybody outside of Memphis or FAU that you picked for either of these 2?
No, I actually did go with Memphis in the regular season, and I know it's a little bit contradictory to the continuity conversation we were having earlier, but I do think that Memphis, especially if the pieces come together for them, I think that the talent level is really, really strong, and I think familiarity with the league might lead to them doing a little bit better. I think it's going to be like within a 1 or 2 game race between those two teams, between Memphis and FAU, but give me Memphis in the regular season.
Yeah, I struggled with that as well. And I think it's because of that if that you said that I still went with FAU for the regular season. Because I'm with you that if that's where it keeps going. If this talent comes together for Penny, it can absolutely be the better team. And I think is the more talented team. But if I just take all that out and just say team, what I'm looking at already right now, it's FAU. So I've got them for the regular season.
Yeah, and I have them for the conference tournament for some of the reasons that we kind of touched on a little bit already. I think maybe FAU's adjustment into the league, maybe it causes them to drop a game or two that they weren't expecting. Maybe they drop a game to Tulane where Memphis sweeps Tulane, and maybe that's the difference in the league. Like those kind of things I think could happen. But by the time we get to March, by the time we get to, I mean, this is when FAU thrives. Like Dusty May doesn't lose games in March. Like we know that. And I think that this team is going to, again, with that continuity, with that experience, with more familiarity in the conference, how it works, I think they're going to take the conference tournament championship. So I think FAU, maybe they don't win the regular season. Maybe Memphis sneaks a game over them, but I think that FAU is the team that's going to take home that. I don't think they'll need that automatic bid, but I think they're going to be the team that gets it out of the American.
Well, I'm right with you on the tournament, but Andy, you're dead wrong about the regular season. FAU is going to sweep this thing, taking home both the regular season and conference tournament crown.
Well, speaking of being dead wrong, let's see how we do on our first team predictions. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about our player of the year, coach of the year, transfer of the year, all sorts of different award predictions for the American Athletic Conference coming up after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your car alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Isaac, it's time. Let's take a look at our predictions here for the American Conference for our first teamers. We're also going to talk about some of those player and team awards at the end here. And Isaac, I'm going to let you kick it off here, talking about your 5-team first team for the American Athletic Conference.
Okay, Andy. As I think I've said before, I have in all these conference things made a rule for myself that I can only have one player from each team, or else I really struggled because I wanted to have both John L. Davis and Elijah Martin on this team from FAU, but I had to limit myself to one. So I went with John L. Davis. I think there's just more specific way. Like I think Elijah Martin is the better athlete and does more like, kind of things like just those jaw-dropping electric moments. But I think John L. Davis probably has the bigger all-around impact as like the dude for FAU. So I went with him. Next, I've got Max Fiedler at Rice, just big man senior. I think he is going to, like Rice, again, we had them projected down our tiers list a good bit, but man, there's just so much that he does so well that I had trouble keeping him off of this list. And then you talked about this guy earlier, but obviously UAB loses Jelly Walker, one of the best names ever. But that means, Andy, that where we had kind of this Eric Gaines, Jelly Walker, Batman and Robin thing, now it's Eric Gaines' turn, right? And I think he just takes that, I don't know, bull by the horns and whatever kind of thing you want to say. And just all that experience from LSU and everything he had there. And now turns into just an absolute dude down there in Birmingham. You mentioned Jalen Forbes earlier at Tulane. I've got him on my first team as well. And then rounding it out, this is a guy that really loved last year at Alabama. I loved what they looked like as a team when he took over the starting guard duties, and that's Javon Quinterly, who moved over to Memphis. Again, if the pieces come together for Memphis, it could be a really, really good team, and I think a big part of that is Javon Quinterly bringing everyone together. He's not going to be Kendrick Davis, Andy. Like, I don't think either of us have any are under any delusions that he will be, but there are some similar things that I see that Javon Quinterly does to Kendrick Davis. Like, he's not going to get to the free throw line as much, stuff like that, but the way he can bring a team together and be a true point guard, I really think is going to help Penny do things. And what Penny can help Javon step into even more, I think is going to be really good. So that's my 5 guys: John L. Davis, Max Fiedler, Eric Gaines, Jalen Forbes, and Javon Quinterly. What about you?
I'm kind of surprised we went 25 minutes into a podcast about the American Athletic Conference without talking about Javon Quinterly, because I think that's such an intriguing and exciting addition for Memphis. And yeah, he's not Kendrick Davis, but I am excited to see what he does. And he is one of 4 players on your list that's also on mine. 4 out of 5 were the same here. Yeah, I had Javon Quinterly, Eric Gaines from UAB, as you mentioned, John L. Davis, and I did not pick Elijah Martin as my other one. I did think about it. I haven't been putting myself under those same rules necessarily, but I left Martin off. I had John L. Davis, Jalen Forbes, again, Gaines and Quinterly, and then my one newcomer, instead of Max Fiedler, I had Zurich Phelps from SMU, from the Mustangs. Dude averaged 17.5 points per game last year as a breakout sophomore. I think similar production for SMU this year, or even a slight uptick in production could put him squarely in that conversation as a first teamer for the Stangs. All right, Isaac, let's talk player of the year, because I ended up sticking with the guy that I listed first on my list here, a guy that I think is going to have he's going to have to replace a 20-point per game scorer in Jalen Cook at Tulane, and that's Jalen Forbes. And for me, Forbes, the guy, 3 straight years where he's averaged over 16 points per game. Last year, that was up to 18.5, and he averaged 18.5 points per game playing alongside a guard who averaged 20. You don't see that all that often, and I think for Forbes, as a player who has continued to improve his scoring output, who is now entering his senior year, who now doesn't have a guy in Cook next to him, that could increase the pressure opposing defenses can put on him, which is certainly a factor, but he's also going to get a lot more shot attempts. And for me, I think we're looking at a guy who's going to drop 20 a game. And if Tulane does finish third or does make a push for second in that conference, I think he's the one who takes home that trophy.
Well, it's funny, Andy, because I kind of had these same thoughts. In fact, it came down to Forbes and the person I actually chose for mine, but it's another person who I talked about steps up after another superstar leaves. So I'm going with Eric Gaines. Obviously, Jelly Walker, we talked about, had 20 and 22 points each of the past 2 years at UAB. Last year, Gaines at UAB had 11.5. The year before that, he averaged 9 a game at LSU. So I just think he takes almost like probably doubles that scoring production this year. I really wouldn't be surprised to see him get into that 20-point per game range. I'm going with Eric Gaines. Either of these guys, I think, is a very worthy recipient of the Player of the Year. Andy, what about Coach of the Year for you?
Yeah, I'm going with Dusty May. Again, I think they kind of have those expectations. They arguably have the expectation where anything other than finishing first would be a disappointment. I also think that there's a very, very good chance they do finish first. But even if they finish second, I think Dusty May is going to win it. Unless Memphis beats him by like 3 games or something like that. I really do think that Dusty May, he's a fantastic coach. He proved it last year. It's a bit of kind of maybe a legacy award of sorts. But if he moves into this conference and finishes in the top 2, I think Dusty May takes it.
I'm right with you there. Welcome to the conference. Congratulations. Now, Andy, transfer of the year. There was a transfer we both had on our first team. And so we've both got Javon Quinterly as our transfer of the year, but I moved past him because you had mentioned an honorable mention transfer that you were thinking about. And it's somebody that I almost went with. So I'd love for you to just share that honorable mention with everyone.
Yeah, it's Bobby Pettiford, who's coming over from Kansas. He's going to East Carolina, and 2.2 points per game at Kansas last year. So it would take a pretty significant jump in terms of production for him to be in this conversation, especially against Quinterly. But he played all 32 games, and anybody who Bill Self plays every night is probably worth a pretty good amount in a conference like the American and at a school like East Carolina. Bill Self, he likes to keep those rotations pretty tight. And I think for Pettiford to be moving on to a school like this, to get a much bigger role a much bigger opportunity. I'm still leaning Quinterly, and I think it would take a lot to take that award away from Quinterly. But if something happens where Quinterly doesn't play all that much, or his minutes are down, and Pettiford comes in and averages 15 a game, I think that's all very plausible, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him in this conversation.
Yep. Kansas bottom 3 in the country last year in bench usage, by the way. So Andy is dead on with that. Andy, let's quickly go through our freshman of the year picks. Why don't you start?
Yeah, I had Keanu Dawes from Rice. Again, the Mikey Williams of it all is a big kind of question mark in terms of what freshmen are going to be immediately productive for Memphis and really for a lot of the teams in this conference. But I think that Dawes is going to play right away for Rice. He's a 6'9" power forward. He's a 4-star. They don't get a whole ton of 4-stars at Rice. I think there's a chance that he's a guy who maybe he doesn't start, but I think he could be a 6th man for them, play big minutes, play around the rim, alter some shots. And I think that might be enough for him, again, depending on Williams' situation, to be the guy who takes home that Freshman of the Year award for the conference.
Same, man. It's clearly Mikey Williams if he plays. I don't see it happening, Andy, if I'm being honest. So I actually went with Zion Stanford, suiting up for Temple this year. I don't project him as a starter, but somebody that is going to be able to do a lot for Temple and should get some good minutes. There's a couple other freshmen at Memphis, JJ Taylor and Carl Sharon-Font, that could be in this conversation as well.
Well, let's close it out, Isaac, with the last thing we always do on this show, which is just the how many teams are going to make the tournament? And we've always set the over-under. And for this conference, we're setting the over-under at 2.5. So whether it's going to be just a 2 or whether a third team is going to sneak in, that's basically the conversation. I'll start with you. Who do you think is going to make the tournament this year out of this conference?
The only way I see it hitting the over is if, I don't think there's any other at-larges outside of Memphis and FAU. So it's going to, to me, it's going to have to be, like you were talking about earlier, Tulane being a bid thief. I just don't see somebody rising up to knock off both of these teams. And so, I've just got the 2 of them. I'm hitting the under right at 2.
Yeah, I'm hitting the under as well. And I do think that if UAB or Tulane or somebody like that wins the conference tournament, and, I think there's a chance that all 3 make it. I don't think that Memphis or FAU would get bounced necessarily. I do think that would be a bid steal situation. I could see a situation where Memphis, is 35th in Ken Pom. They lose in the semifinals of the tournament. Maybe they are all of a sudden a play-in, 11 seed type situation. But I do think that unless somebody wins it, you're going to get 2. And if somebody does win it, maybe you get 3, but it's probably going to be 2.
Folks, we are 4 weeks to the day away from tipping off the season. Absolutely cannot wait. Just got a couple more weeks of these previews. Thanks so much for tuning in with us to kick off a brand new week. You everydayers, we love to have you with us all the time. You can follow Andy on Twitter at Andy Patton CBB. You can follow me at Isaac Shade or the show at Locked On CBB. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show, smash the like button, and leave comments on your thoughts on this year's American Athletic Conference. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, but until tomorrow, peace.